Our eyes are some of the most advanced found in the animal kingdom, something that gives us an unparalleled view of the world around us. What we see, though, is just the tip of the iceberg. It's time to reveal what's hidden beneath the surface as we take a look at 15 amazing things seen under a microscope. Number 15. Orange juice. Orange juice is a staple liquid that you'll find in refrigerators around the world. But perhaps the greatest surprise is that it only became widespread in the latter decades of the 20th century, after being found to be a palatable way of ingesting nutrients during the Second World War. It's now a crucial industry in places like Florida, where many tens of millions of gallons are produced each year. But rather than being a smooth liquid like it may appear, it's far more complex than you'd imagine. That's because OJ contains a large number of different compounds, from vitamin C, sugar, and carbohydrates, to potassium, thiamine, folate, and citric acid, which all leads to it looking very different under a microscope. Magnifying the juice by 100 times reveals a complex crystalline structure that looks more like what you'd expect to see in a mining operation as opposed to a breakfast beverage. And when it's looked at with polarized light, the different compounds take on wildly different colors. This is the case with both smooth and pulpy versions of the drink. So next time you take a sip, don't forget that what you're swallowing is much more complicated than it appears at first. Number 14. Shark skin. Sharks are the alpha predators of the oceans and strike fear into the minds of any other creatures that they set their sights on. Of course, one of the biggest traits that make them such efficient hunters is their rows upon rows of sharp teeth. But their skin is also integral to their abilities too. If you've ever run your hand along the skin of a shark, you'll know that it has a very sandpapery texture to it, in a way that makes it very different to the skin of any other animal. And it's only when you see it under a microscope that you'll realize why this is. Their skin, instead of being made up of cells like ours, is actually what's described as a dermal corset that's arranged as a helical network around their body. In simpler terms, this means that their bodies are surrounded by a layer of microscopic teeth that are all arranged in a specific pattern, and it performs two main functions. The first is that it acts as an external skeleton that's attached to their swimming muscles and means they're able to conserve energy. And the second is that it gives them a hydrodynamic advantage, so they're able to swim faster through the water with less effort than would otherwise be needed. Furthermore, each tooth-like structure in their skin generates a small swirl in the water as the shark passes through it, and this has been found to create a suction effect that gives the shark further thrust that helps it move forwards even quicker. Just like the teeth in their mouths, sharks will quickly replace any parts of their skin that are damaged, and some species will grow these dermal denticles in a different shade to give them the ability to camouflage in within certain aquatic environments. Number 13. Chalk. Chalk is one of the most commonly used natural substances around the world. You're probably familiar with it from its use on chalkboards or on sidewalks, but also in the production of building materials, fertilizers, antacids, and cleaning products. And while it may seem like a fairly simple substance, it's actually far more complex than most people realize. To understand why this is, it's important to know how chalk formed in the first place. All of the world's supplies originated during the Cretaceous period between 99 and 65 million years ago, when dinosaurs still roamed the Earth. It was a relatively calm atmospheric time when there wasn't much ocean bed erosion in certain places, and over millions of years, layer upon layer of microscopic organisms whose shells were made of calcite built up on top of each other as they died. This further compressed over time, and it's now the only form of limestone that shows signs of compaction. And the result is a solid material that can easily be crumbled, or where a layer can be removed as it's pressed against a harder substance. This history can still be seen in chalk when you look at it under a microscope, and it's only then that the material reveals itself as a marine graveyard, with the individual remains of these creatures still clearly visible. Number 12. Tapeworm head. Tapeworms are ribbon-like parasitic worms that have bodies that are essentially made up of a series of egg packages known as proglottids that are continuously released into their surrounding environment to infect other organisms. Depending on the species, there are various ways in which they enter a new host, but once they reach their adult form, they will latch on to the digestive tract inside an animal and then will feed on the nutrients that pass by, which they then use to produce more eggs. Several species of tapeworms are able to infect humans too, often from eating undercooked pork, beef, or fish. And while the idea of being host to one of these is disgusting enough, it becomes even more frightening when you see what they look like up close. The worms are made up of three main parts: their head, called the scolex, a short neck, and then the body that's made up of the egg sacs. It's the scolex that looks most startling under a microscope, and this is all because of what it's designed to do. They don't have mouths because they're able to simply absorb nutrients directly through their body, and the head is instead used to hold themselves in position. They therefore have rows of hooks or suckers, and once they find the ideal position, they'll use these to latch onto the intestine of their host, an attachment that, once done successfully, is almost impossible to get them to release. Number 11. Vinyl record. Music technology has, of course, advanced significantly in the past decades. While we now mainly stream songs with high fidelity, it wasn't so long ago that we had to rely on CDs, cassette tapes, and originally vinyl records. Made from a resin called shellac, but from the 1940s typically made with polyvinyl chloride, vinyl records would become the main way in which music was recorded and distributed during the 20th century. Instead of being digital, like the most popular methods these days, vinyl records are analog, whereby because of the relatively soft material they're made from, the sound waves are essentially imprinted upon them. It's then simply a case of placing them on a dedicated player where a needle follows the groove in the record and its movement is turned into sound. If you hold a record in your hands, you'll be able to see the grooves in it and the starting point where you'll want to position the player's needle in the first place. But when one is looked at under an electron microscope, the complexity of their shape becomes even clearer. It's amazing to see that something so simple in relation to what's used today was able to work so well. There are many believe that imprints like these are able to result in a much better sound quality than the best digital methods that are now available. Number 10. Kosher salt. Depending on how it's produced, salt is available in different types, and while it may often seem like an uninteresting substance at a macro level, things get far more interesting under a microscope. In particular, kosher salt, which is also known as cooking salt or rock salt, is surprising because unlike table salt, it's far coarser and doesn't have anywhere near as many additives. Made mainly of sodium chloride in its purest form, it's known for having a cleaner flavor, and because of the crystal sizes, it can also be used for brining meat or even able to clean cookware. Because it isn't ground down so much, this type of salt looks incredible under a microscope when various different shapes become visible. What you see will depend on the process used to make it, but instead of having cubic crystals, it'll typically be either flat and plate-like, or in some circumstances, when it's been created by evaporating salty water, the crystals will be hollow pyramids. It's such a commonly used substance that we rarely ever give it a second thought too. But the fact that salt looks so impressive under magnification shows just how unexpected the microscopic world truly is. Number 9. Dandelion. Dandelions are a group of flowering plant species that are mainly found throughout Europe and North America, where they're often seen growing in meadows and fields as yellow flowers at first, that then transform into a seed head. What you may not realize, though, is that instead of just being one flower, they're technically classified as being a collection of small flowers that group together into a composite flower head, known as a floret. And that's why when they transform, they're able to produce so many seeds that are ready to be carried into the wind or against the fur of a passing animal. Just from looking at them normally, you can see that they have a few structures that have developed to help them spread. But once you see them under a microscope, everything becomes clearer. When they're in their flower form, the seeds are growing at the base, and above this is a tuft of white fiber around a stalk that will become part of the white ball that eventually forms. Above this is a yellow floret, and at the crown of the flower is the stigma with multiple lobes that are covered in pollen. It's because of these structures that dandelions are so popular with insects, which are tempted in by the nectar and get pollen grains stuck in them, and they transport that to the next flower they feed from. Equally as impressive, though, is when the dandelion turns into a seed ball, because it's then that you see each seed is actually covered in a series of tiny spikes. Not only do these allow them to attach to passing animals, but once they've been dropped, they help the seed secure itself to the ground so it can begin germinating. Number 8. Peacock feather. There are 3 species of peacock, 2 of which are native to Asia, and 1 of which originated in Africa. And for good reason, they're known for being some of the most ornate and spectacular of all birds. This is because of the lavish feather trains that the males grow in order to attain the attention of potential mates, which display an array of iridescent colors. They are spectacular enough to see at normal size, but while from a distance you only really see the pattern of the eye shapes, a microscope reveals far more complexity. The incredible colors are formed by nanostructures within the feathers that are each a different color and will change their intensity depending on what angle you're looking at them from. When magnified by 500 times, you begin to see every minute line and curve of the feathers with the distinct bundles of barbules and the unique coloration of each segment. With greens, blues, golds, and more, it's quite difficult to photograph these in such detail because of the way the iridescent colors are so highly reflective. It is amazing to see in such detail that the mesmerizing colors of a peacock simply aren't the result of pigments like you may expect, but of interactions with light that reflects in different ways, depending on how you look at it, and surely means that an already spectacular creature becomes even more impressive. Number 7. Ensutite and cacoxenite. Most natural compounds that are dug from the ground look no more interesting than any other piece of stone or rock, but depending on their chemical makeup, they could well be hiding something beautiful on a microscopic level. This image shows two minerals, ensutite and cacoxenite, under 5 times magnification. It's unlikely you'll ever heard of them because they're not particularly sought after. Cacoxenite, for example, is a golden-colored mineral made up of iron, phosphate, and aluminum that's often found in regions where iron ores are extracted. Its name, in Latin, means bad guest, in reference to the fact that its presence will reduce the quality of iron that's smelted from the ore, so it's usually seen as bad news whenever it's seen. Ensutite is a dull, boring mineral that's made of manganese and oxygen, and it's often found in larger manganese deposits around the world. And it has for a time been used in production of cathodes used in zinc-carbon batteries, but this is being phased out in favor of synthetic alternatives. Together, though, these two minerals complement each other in a way that almost seems organic in the image, and shows that beauty can be found in almost anything, so long as you look hard enough. Number 6. Seawater. It's one of the most abundant substances on the surface of our planet, but have you ever given much thought to what's actually in seawater? Of course, the big difference that we all know about it in comparison to freshwater is that it contains salt, and on average it has a salinity of around 3.5%. It also contains a huge number of other chemicals, with the main ones being magnesium, sulfur, calcium, potassium, bromine, and carbon. Beyond its chemical makeup, seawater has a huge biological content too, with various types of free-swimming bacteria, diatoms, and countless other microbial species that are far too small to detect with the human eye. It's only under a microscope that you see just how many different creatures and elements there actually are. Anytime a sample has been taken from any part of the water column on Earth, similar results are found, with algae, tiny fish eggs, worms, bacteria, and many more usually found each time. Next time you are in the ocean and open your mouth, just think of this and quite what you might be letting inside your body. Number 5. Mite. Mites are one of the most common causes of allergies around the home, and the more you learn about them, the more you'll surely want to be rid of them for good. Instead of referring to specific species, the name is a catch-all for a number of types of microscopic arachnids that are closely related to other spiders, but usually grow no larger than 3/100ths of an inch long, far smaller than can be seen with the human eye. When you see them under a microscope, though, it's clear to see how spider-like they actually are, although their bodies aren't as segmented as larger species. The front of their body isn't a head and doesn't have any eyes or the brain, but is instead a retractable feeding mechanism that will either be used to suck up particles or bite into animals. More than 48,000 different species of mites have been recorded, although it's believed there could well be over 1 million. And they're found almost everywhere, from the soil, plants, and caves to freshwater and in our homes. Dust mites, for example, thrive within warm environments and feed on the flakes of skin that we naturally shed. Huge colonies can form in mattresses, and their presence can trigger responses like asthma or other allergies if you happen to have a natural response to the proteins that they produce. Number 4. Sand. When you're walking along a beautiful beach, your focus is usually out across the calm blue waters or the stunning scenery that you're surrounded by. But arguably, the most varied and spectacular thing of all is the sand beneath your feet. To the naked eye, it rarely looks like anything more than an orange, white, or brown substance that gets caught between your toes, but it's been formed over many years and contains plenty of surprises. Sand is defined as being a granular material that's made up of divided particles of rock and minerals. In places like the Caribbean, the sand you see is predominantly made up of the remains of animals that have lived on the reefs in the past few million years, so contains pieces of coral and calcium carbonate shells. You can see this very clearly when you look at a sample of sand under a microscope. And one of the most exciting things about this is that you'll always find something new and different when you magnify the sand from a different source. Coral sand, for example, is very different to the type you'll find in a desert, which itself is distinctly separate from what's found on a volcanic beach or the shore of a lake. Number 3. Velcro. Originally invented in 1941 by a Swiss engineer, hook and loop fasteners, which most of us know by the brand name Velcro, have become commonplace around the world in various different products, offering a simple form of attachment that can be easily ripped apart and then reattached. Few people ever really consider how it works, and microscopes were crucial to the process right from the start. When you look at Velcro under magnification, you see that it's made up of two parts, the section made up of hooks and the one made up of the loops. When the scrambled loops are placed into the hooks, a large number of them become entangled, which provides a secure hold. But they'll also easily release when pulled in the right direction. Rather than being developed by a fluke, though, the inventor of this style of fastening looked to nature and actually investigated the way that seeds of certain plants would get stuck to his clothes. Under a microscope, he saw they were covered in hooks that were latching onto the hoops within the fabric that he was wearing, and this gave him the idea to artificially replicate it. Number 2. Digger wasp eyes. Digger wasps are a large category of wasp species that behave in a slightly different way to the ones that we often encounter. Instead of building large colonies and nests, they instead build smaller nests in pre-existing underground cavities or burrows that they dig themselves into soil or sand. Anywhere that the ground is made up of a loose material is a potential home for a digger wasp, and because of where they live, they're far more likely to be seen flying closer to the ground than any other species. Feeding on grubs and larvae, the females paralyze their prey with their sting and then drag it back to their burrow where they and their offspring can feed. They don't tend to live in larger groups though, so each individual will have its own nest. That's at least fortunate if you've noticed more than 10 digger wasp holes in your yard, because that means there'll only be 10 of them rather than many, many more. They do, however, quickly multiply, and the competition in the insect world for similar food sources means that they've developed a few attributes that give them an advantage over the rest, one of which is their eyesight. A microscopic view shows just how complex they are, where they have 3 main eyes in a triangular formation that are used for seeing objects in the same way that we do, but a series of other smaller eyes that instead are responsive to changes in brightness and can quickly detect movement to either help the wasp hunt or to evade a possible predator. Number 1. Snow. There's nothing quite like looking out across the countryside when it's covered in a blanket of snow, at least for the first few days after it's fallen. It's a wonderful sight, but it's even more incredible when you look at it under a microscope. Snow usually forms within clouds when water particles are suspended in the atmosphere, and because of the low temperature, turns into individual ice crystals. As they fall, these begin to merge and then undergo further changes once they land on the ground and begin to compress. You may have heard that no two snowflakes are ever the same, and while this is true, things get even more bizarre when you magnify them. Images of snow taken by an electron microscope, which is capable of magnifying by up to 1,000,000 times, shows the incredible variety of snowflakes. There are those that take on what you'd consider to be a traditional snowflake shape, but rounded ones, flattened ones, tree-shaped ones, hexagonal ones, and many, many more. Researchers have also found that based on electron microscope images, you're able to narrow down the exact region where it fell to, because the water composition and environmental conditions are unique, even to the point where it's been found that snow seen at the ice caps of Mars is very different thanks to its composition of water and frozen carbon dioxide. Watch our nature playlist for more top 15 videos about beautiful nature. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best nature videos.